just jump right in here. Okay, the Affordable Housing Subcommittee of the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development meeting has now commenced. It is June 21st, 2023 at 4 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourself until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your identify yourself. Also, in order to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by the chat function. So I'll start the roll call. Marianne Beerling, not present yet, correct? Maggie Maroteas is absent. Jim Toffel.
I'm here.
Kenny Wong.
Here as well.
We have our ex officio, Corin Manning.
Here.
Marcos Ismail, is Marcos here? I don't see him. Absent. Betty Villegas. Also absent. Also, we have Ray. Ray's the commissioner now too, correct? Yay.
Yeah, I'm not in the subcommittee yet, but wanted to sit in on a meeting before deciding on a subcommittee.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for being with us, Ray.
And I'll just chime in. I'm going to chime in real quick about the I'm not sure 100% on if they can vote, like, or if they're an official member. So I'm still trying to confirm that, but we don't have any voting items. So I'm not sure also how that works too, if we can just have discussion over the agenda items. So I'm confirming some things in the background as well. So keep going, Shay, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that makes sense to me that we would hold off a vote until anyways, but I think we had some items to discuss. And then we have Joe Adino here, correct? I think I saw Joe.
Yeah, hi.
And then our other regular attendee, Megan Headings.
Here, thanks.
And Jason Heisey. Jason, are you with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, thank you. Looks like David Wall's absent and Sally Schwinn. Okay. All right, call to the audience. This is the time when any member of the public may address the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each due to open meeting law. Commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda item for a future meeting. Does anyone have something they'd like to share? I don't see too many members of the public with us today either. So moving on, number 3, affordable housing inventory goal. Jim and Sarah, do you guys want to take the lead on this?
Sure, Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll
Sure.
jump in. So we had, I didn't really prepare anything great because I've been in closing signature craziness. I sort of feel a little intense about all the signatures I've collected from Ann Shineka on the last day. But I do have some kind of updates on those numbers that we're talking about the units that were going to fall out, right? So that was a part of the presentation, which units were going to fall out of affordability. And I pulled together better data and information that we can kind of talk about as well. This was on the mayor and council agenda a while back. I was going to try to ask Ann when that was, because it was all the documentation I'm going to show you was included in mayor and council materials. And then I hadn't gotten a chance to get it sent out to the subcommittee, but I will do that after the meeting and probably tomorrow for you all so that you have access to what I'm going to show. So there was an article in one of the things, AZ Central, that talked about the process of units terming out and also in a premature fashion due to the qualified contract process, right? So I don't know how much this has been talked about in the subcommittee, but I think it's been talked about off and on But in 2010, this, we changed the policy so that people aren't terming out through that qualified contract process as much anymore. So really the data that we have is from 1993 up to like 2008. Before that 2010 thing changed, and then the projects, those are the key projects that we know we could lose prematurely, for sure. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and just share this spreadsheet because everybody loves looking at spreadsheets on Zoom. And we'll share this with you all for sure. But ultimately, and let me get up my cheat sheet that I wrote as well. The 9% projects have a 30-year affordability period. So this spreadsheet, right, we see is 1993 up to 2008. This was all prior to the waiver of the qualified contract option. So qualified contract processes have been removed from the totals in the spreadsheet, but are provided for reference. The estimated potential loss in affordable units is 1,884 units for the city of Tucson that were funded with 9% LIHTCs. So you can see the highlighted ones are ones that have gone through the qualified contracts process. But then the total of low-income units that were developed under this qualified contract thing these are the total units that we could lose through this process. So I'll share that with you so that you have access to the numbers. You can see that, as well as that PowerPoint from the last time. I'll put it in that and put it all together so that you can see kind of all of the total numbers and understand a little bit more about this process.
Can you pull that back up?
Yeah, sorry. I get like screen share like shy, and I don't like sharing it all the time. Okay, here we go. Pulling it back up. All right.
So these are just LIHTC deals. Some of them are Hope 6. I think Silverbell is Hope 6 as well.
Silverbell, MLK. Well, MLK is no longer tax credit. Silverbell,
That's fourth from the bottom.
yeah. The South Park's a Hope 6 and the LIHTC. Posada Sentinel is a Hope 6 and a LIHTC.
Which one?
180, let's see, 186 under 1999, Posada Sentinel. That's a LIHTC Hope 6.
Oh.
And South Park is a LIHTC Hope 6. Martin Luther King Building is Hope 6, and it's not a LIHTC. It's a tax credit exchange, but it's subject to LIHTC rules.
So do we have any information in terms of when these could fall out of affordability?
Anything after 1990, well, theoretically, anything before 2010 could ask for a qualified contract.
So all
Or
of
not
the-
2010. When did ADOH started giving points for waiving qualified contract?
2010.
No, date.
Oh, ADOH?
Yeah. I don't think it's been more than 5 years.
2018?
That sounds about right.
Yeah, I think so.
And looking at the title of the document, this is 1993 through 2009, correct?
Yeah, there's a much more recent version of this.
Yeah, they just pulled us a spreadsheet because they had mentioned the 2010 scoring determination, the waiver of the qualified contract happened in 2010.
Did
And
it?
I don't, yeah, so.
All right, that may be true. I don't remember that, but I'll take your word for it.
So just to refresh everyone's memory, right now for the city of Tucson, there's 10,826 affordable units total. So 1,489 are owned by the city, 4,996 are Section 8, and 4341 are light tech. And HUD 202s. So. I don't
And
remember.
this is
What is it?
1,884 units that could possibly be falling out in the next few years.
Correct. Did we
Which
decide
doesn't
on a
seem
time
real.
period for setting an affordability goal? Was it like 2030? Did we say 5 years? We didn't really, did we ever set a time frame? We didn't.
Clarifying question on that, Jim. The Section 8 units you mentioned, those were ones that are city owned, is that right? We're talking just about city owned properties?
No,
Okay,
no, those are properties with housing vouchers.
okay. I thought that was a lot more than we had. I was getting excited we had that many. So those are just things that people are renting from private.
The city of
Landlords.
Tucson, my notes are the city of Tucson was 1489.
1489 owned by the city.
The city of Tucson, yeah.
And what was the Section 8?
4996. And then the light tech and the 202s made up the balance of 4341. So the total currently is 10,826.
Thank you.
So my thought last year is, I don't think it's unrealistic to try to obtain 450 units per year. If that would be 9% projects at 75 units. And then 300 units through either 4% or other sources. So that would basically be 4% deal per year, 200 units, and then 100 from everything else. And that could include the for sale properties. So if we wanted to make 2030 as a goal, as a time frame, that would be 6 years times 450. That's another 2,700 units plus the 10,826. So that's 13,526. But then we're at risk of losing up to 1,800. Penny?
Hi, thanks. I'm wondering, has there been, sorry, I'm pretty new to the statewide kind of conversation, but has there been an assessment of what the statewide shortfall of units may be? And using that as a reference point to, what would be a reasonable amount to approach that goal statewide?
Yeah.
So, you're kind of coming at it from a just like numbers production standpoint. But I'm curious how big that gap is, or if that will cover our area's contribution, say, to the larger goal.
Yeah, let me pull that up. So some of that data is on the National Low Income Housing Coalition's website.
Did we talk about that in committee when Ruby was here last year in May?
I don't remember us talking about that.
Okay. I thought maybe that'd be a good reference for Ken Council.
Oh, Megan put it on the chat.
Yeah, Kenny, I was just gonna say that we had a similar discussion last meeting about, the need versus, what we're able to produce. Those are two very different numbers, and even just trying to get good data on what the need is difficult. We're not sure exactly, I think, what that shortfall is.
So according if you guys look at the link that Megan sent, the shortfall in the state is 136,000 homes out of just under 180,000 extremely low renters. So I guess I'd like to just throw it out there. What do you guys think? I mean, should this be a stretch goal? Should this be something that we think is obtainable and realistic? You know, we could say a stretch goal is to have 15,000 units in the city by 2030. That would be a stretch goal. I think the 13.5 is probably a more realistic goal. Just given, you know, the constraints.
I mean, for me, I feel like I feel like the whole point of the exercise would be to try to ask for more funding, right? Like based on the need, we know there's a delta, there's a difference between the need and what we're able to produce. And so then whatever that difference is, we know we're not going to be able to meet all the need, but we should be able to ask for more money to respond to a greater need, right? I mean, isn't that the purpose of this commission? So that's why for me, like wanting to just stick with what we're able to produce doesn't seem like a goal. That seems like we would just be trying to hit the status quo.
Any?
I guess I would say I'm of a similar mindset of, you know, I think it's important to keep like the current capacity in mind, of course, but those numbers seem to be relative to one another, right? And to this point of, you know, building further capacity or finding more creative solutions. I think that that gap is helpful to point towards.
Can I ask a question too on sort of, do we have a good estimate of current cost per unit? Has anyone sort of looked at that right now?
For total development costs?
Yeah, like is there an average? Is there a good standard average? I mean, I'm hearing numbers like closer to 220,000 a door. I don't know, like if there's a good sense of per door cost, but if we're talking about a delta, like if we're talking about needing 26,000 units in Tucson, and I don't know, one of the things I was curious about is how accurate it is to use sort of if we have a good frame of reference of like, yes, this is a good metric of like how many units were deficient. But if we're looking at like 200,000 a door or more, and we know we're 26,000 behind in needed units, I mean, it gives a pretty
That's
staggering number.
way low for total development costs. That's just.
I would assume so.
No. I'm just going to go through the, while we're talking, I'm going to go through the LIHTC 9% list just to see what the per unit average per unit cost is, but it's probably north of 300 a door.
Yeah.
I'll
The
back
construction,
in a minute.
typical construction right now is probably 240 to 250 average per unit. And then a rule of thumb that I usually use is construction makes up about 2/3 of the total development cost. So that would put it closer to 350, maybe 360,000 a unit total development costs.
Just looking at the LIHTC application round, this is request, not what was funded. The low is 292. The high is a whopping 750,000. Holy Jesus. Weighted average is oh my God. It's probably in the high $300,000 range, but I'll come back.
Okay. I mean, that number alone is pretty, I would call it devastating.
It's not good.
Maybe that's the reason that no one really uses it. It feels
Well, if
unattainable.
nobody uses it, then why are 2 applications rejected for everyone that's funded?
No, I meant the need. I meant the overall need in our community for funds to actually create the housing
Mhm.
required. The 7 billion.
Yeah, I think we've done that. We've done that math, that rough math at different points. And yeah, it was upwards of billions of dollars that are needed. And it's just, and that's unrealistic. And I get that, but like, there has to be a happy medium, right? Between what can be asked for and then what is possible, right? You know, but we had talked about our primary purpose being seeking to find funds, right? And asking for those funds. And that's to me where this data is really important. And if it's not clear and if it's not compelling, and I think it is compelling. What was that, David?
$384,311 weighted average total development cost.
300 and what was that?
384,311.
And that's for commercial. So I've made the switch over to residential for the past 3 years, and you can do residential single family, I feel, for a lot less when you're not doing commercial, your overhead for the site development costs and all that isn't as high. So there are different markets and in size too. If you start looking at really small, you know, there's ways to get around, I think, that 300 a door, 380 a door price, but for
David,
anything-
I also think that the 4% have a lower average cost than the 9%. So you're just looking at the 9%, where you don't get the same economies of scale on those as you do a larger project. But, you know, just kind of following through Megan's thought process here, if we assume an average of 360,000 per unit total development cost, and we set the goal at 15,000, that's 4,200 units. That comes out to $1.5 billion. Is, you know, the total cost of development over the next, 6 years. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is a typical development life cycle on projects is 2 to 3 years. So, if we talk about 2030, really that means that you need to have funding and approvals and everything in place by 2028, which is only 4 years away. So that's a pretty steep goal, I think, if we went to 15,000. Sarah?
I was just gonna chime in, kind of speaking to that number again, and just as like a random aside, we have been working on the Plan Tucson, the general plan update, kind of, alongside PDSD, they're kicking it off. And we had sort of looked into the old general plan from 2001, which was just sort of more of a exercise. And there was a policy in there that said, establish a community-wide goal that 10% of the city's housing stock is affordable to families who are low income. Granted, that was in 2001. It was a completely different world, but also, obviously on the tips of people's tongues then. There was a pretty beefy housing element section in 2001. A lot of it similar to the HAST plan, but we thought that was interesting. And there was also a policy to encourage developers to designate at least 15% of all new units, rental or owner occupied, specifically as affordable housing. So those were policies in our old general plan. And, not saying that that's what we should do either, but just sort of looking to the past a little bit. That was a number that had been thrown out at that time.
Sarah, do you know what the total housing stock is in the city?
I knew you were going to ask me that, and I'm going to have to be like, I'll work on that for you. I mean,
well, if you say 10%, if it's probably what, 250,000, maybe 200, somewhere in there.
sure. I will.
So
Yeah, we
Cory?
actually have that in the housing study. I'll get that in just a second.
Okay, cool.
We're closer to 5% is, I guess, if you look at where we are now. Right?
Yeah, so trying to double the housing stock, which you've mentioned that before, Jim, like as a goal, like maybe it's just a simple double or triple the existing stock of what we have.
And if it's okay to ask some more basic questions here, we have the time for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that sounds like a ton of money per door for housing. And I'm wondering, actually, you're starting to talk about this of other ways of developing in residential and those kinds of things. I'm like, what in this subcommittee, what we talk about that's not just around like big development, building affordable housing, but like, does this subcommittee, is this also a space where people are talking about like paying a whole bunch of people to put deed restrictions on their homes so that that stays as permanent affordable housing rather than having to like enter each property as a new property into community land trust? Policies to encourage people to do tenancy in common, so that they're not just building a casita and ADU and renting it to someone, but building that as permanently affordable housing. I'm just like wondering where this committee falls in terms of looking at things beyond like LIHTC and the like $300,000 a door units, because it does seem like things like having a bunch of small homes on city-owned property could be so much less expensive.
Definitely from a construction perspective, that is true.
I mean, yeah, I mean, to be honest, Ray, like there's no funding, right, for anything residential. And so that's why we end up talking about LIHTC a lot, because it's the one federal program we have that has the biggest impact. And so in terms of like just the amount of units, and I'm with you, Ray, because my heart is right now, my work has shifted gears, from, primarily before I was doing all LIHTC projects and now working on smaller scale residential projects. And it's a huge difference in cost. I've built units I have some owner builder teams who have built things themselves for, as you know, less than 40, 50,000. And they're small, but they're livable. And, I'd say my range for residential hasn't really gone past 200. So I hear you and I totally understand, but all that, and I guess for me, and that's where I see, and residential still makes up, right? 90%, 75% of our total lots are zoned R1, R2, R3. So I do see potential for like private market, maybe there are some policies that make sense. Even just things as simple as like, can we get permit fees lowered or impact fees lowered, for private development? Like there's some bigger, but I haven't had the sense that there's any political appetite for any of that. So we haven't been pushing on any of those policies or ideas.
Thank you. Because I think about like where to put energy. Like I'm not a developer. I know I've read stuff about LIHTC. It still have a really hard time understanding how it works. Would love to be in creative space where we're thinking about things like, right, if we're doing a housing bond or something like that, is there money that's more flexible that doesn't have to meet all of these standards that make it so that's super expensive to build a unit, but something that gives the flexibility to do what might actually make sense. And yeah, love your suggestions there, Shay, around like how incorporating not just like how much more money is needed to build, but also what other changes can happen that are in the power of the city, that are like changing some of the processes for building so that it's easier and more affordable.
So I think another piece of this puzzle is looking at what is currently in the development pipeline in the city of Tucson and pulling out the Tucson house, because that's a rehab and it's going to not create new units, but maintain existing units. There are 13 projects that are either going through preliminary approval all the way through finishing construction right now, and that's a total of just shy of 1,400 apartments. So if we look at that as basically being set here for the next 2 years. So we know we've got 10,826. We're going to be adding most likely about 1,400 to that. That's going to take us to 12,200 in say 2026, or by the end of 2026. So, you know, as we set this goal, I think it's looking to the next 4 years and saying, what's a realistic thing going from this to that time frame. So Megan.
Sorry, this was a little bit more in response to what Ray was speaking to, but I mean, it seems like the Pima County Regional Affordable House Task Force just, you know, there's the recommendation that's coming from that's setting aside general funds that I think potentially have more flexibility, and that's how some of the communities can do some outside the box development. And so it seems like there could be some, you know, there could be recommendations, like having a really solid dollar figure and saying this is what it really takes, and then making some recommendations or requests to mayor and council on, we need a line item, and specifically if it's something coming from general funds that has more flexibility, that maybe isn't tied to federal funds that really tie things up, then there's opportunity. And I know like the city of Tucson just got the award from AARP to do ADU. I think it's, I don't want to step on any toes for other updates, but it seems like there's some exciting like opportunities that might bring about ease of other development opportunity that could also still be part of the conversation for, you know, maybe setting a goal that is surrounded around LIHTC, but then also having some other segments of that goal that are a little bit more outside the box of development.
Dave?
Yeah, I really liked the idea of whatever general funds went out. We had talked about it in the housing commission, but having like set asides where you have different types of housing, which again speaks to, you know, what I think a lot of what you're talking about, Ray, is just trying to come up with and think about different ideas for, you know, piloting projects, or you know, just where you're not competing just with LIHTC, because that's a very specific program, very specific program. But also I think that in what I had hoped we would talk about today was some of the LIHTC data and how many of these units are phasing out. I've always felt that that program is a great program. Like it's great at getting units built, you know, probably the most efficiently and quickly in terms of just volume, but it lags to me that thinking of the life cycle, right? To me would be potentially another goal, is like if we were to ask for general funds from or bond funding, like how can we incentivize more of these units that are about to phase out to, like, you know, get them preserved, you know, offer, I don't know what it was, like a LIHTC buyback program, you know, like how do you incentivize more nonprofits and other, you know, people doing this work to take an existing unit, because that's to me going to be a much easier lift than trying to do a new build.
I get a ton of phone calls from people looking for projects that are basically out of their compliance period. They want to buy it and then do a 4% rehab, use a 4% tax credit rehab, which maintains the affordability, not at the same level. So it's 80% AMI versus, you know, what, 50 to 60% AMI, but it does maintain affordability. So I guess, you know, the other question is, how often do projects really fall out of affordability completely? I mean, I know that they change hands and they'll do a 4% rehab to keep them affordable, but do they really go back to the straight market rate very often? I'm not aware of many that do.
I think there's some that do, and I don't know the exact number. We could try to sort that out. But the article that had been circulated, I think, to the committee before was about a project in Marana that, you know, was going through that exact thing and going to market rate and people were getting kicked out. So, but I don't know the exact number.
There are definitely some I know of, old tax credit projects that have gone market, but not in the last few years that I know of.
Yeah, I think with the 4% tax credit program, I think there's opportunities for developers to keep those affordable and to take care of some of the deferred maintenance costs on projects where they're not falling out as frequently as maybe they used to.
Well, yeah, but I was wondering, Jim, if there's like is there a, you know, again, a gap there where, you know, I don't know, how many X amount of dollars per 4% project would make, you know, a difference to more of these projects staying in the program.
I guess my feeling about projects falling out is I feel like we probably shouldn't take that into consideration because it's something we can't control. You know, I think there are paths for people to keep projects affordable if they want to, but in terms of setting a goal, I guess my feeling is if we look at where we are, and then try to come up with a number looking forward, I wouldn't take into account things falling out. It'll make the goal harder to achieve if they do fall out. But Megan?
I would disagree on that. I think that only because this is truly just trying to set a target for like to keep the focus on where it needs to be, and the preservation of a lot of those units seems pretty critical. So losing them at a rate that you're building the same new, you're still not getting ahead of the problem. And so I would say, you know, maybe the recommendation is more one for advocacy side, which is ensuring that there truly is funds available that these properties can tap into for the renovations. Like a lot of them have some pretty deferred maintenance costs and needs. And so making sure that the 4% stays as a viable option. And also, you know, even with 4%, like the gap needed to still fund the project is pretty significant. So that's when like home funds become really critical, project-based vouchers become really critical, making sure that there's enough other funds that can be, you know, accessed to keep these in our affordable housing stock would be, to me, maybe an area of advocacy that the committee could have as a focus.
I think we're saying the same thing. I just probably didn't articulate it very well, that when we're setting a goal, we should assume zero attrition of units falling out. So that's got to be part of the strategy, where we're not going to assume a certain number is going to fall out of the affordability. And if they do, it makes it more difficult to achieve the goal.
Yeah, I think I would love to see, again, if we were talking about like these set asides or goals of what we would want to do with a large pot of money, just preservation in and of itself to me is just a huge goal, because it happens at this level, but it's also happening again at the single family home level where you have people flipping property. I mean, it's always been the case. People flip properties all the time. It's the same issues. It's how do you rent something back at an affordable rate when you've had to invest all this money into it to fix it up, to get it market ready, you know? So, but it seems like that difference in what it would take to do the renovations is still going to be way less money than building new, right? Like the amount of public investment that it would take to do a rehab versus a new build. I mean, which to me, for our economy and where we're at in Tucson, it seems like a more viable, important goal than just focusing on new builds.
So just, I guess, bringing this back, at the last CEHD meeting, I think I said something along the lines of that the subcommittee would come back to the overall commission with a recommendation on what we thought the goal should be and why. So, if we say that right now there's 10,826 units that are affordable, and we think that by the year 2020, by the end of 2026, that stock's going to increase by 1,392. That takes us to a total of 12,218. And then over the next 4 years, so starting this next year, if the city can develop 450 new units per year, the net increase being 450 units per year, that would take the total affordable units in the city by 2030 to 14,018 units total. So I guess I'd like to just pose the question to the group again. Do we think that's a realistic goal, or do we want to create a stretch goal? What's the feeling of the other commissioners?
I have a question, and I'm sorry I was late. And I'd like David to kind of chime in on this. Is it feasible in Tucson, given the administration politics, in Washington and the economy, to think that we can do what Jim has said, which you're saying, if I'm correct, Jim, is 450 units a year? What are your thoughts on that, David?
I don't know why I have any more knowledge on that than anyone else, but we're talking about new and preserve.
That's the net increase.
Net increase 450. I mean, you'd have to do some 4%. It's hard to do we're just talking rental. So, or I'm just talking rental because that's what I do. But given the dollar limits on how much LIHTC there is, 9%, 450 new 9% is tough. But if you could do a 4% and a couple of 9s, that's not merely feasible, it's easily achievable.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
My hesitation there is, I think it's doable. But the level of get financing the city knows we get per year, I don't know if it's going to be enough to fill the gap in the 4%. I mean, it's not enough to fill the 4% projects. If we're in a situation where state and local fiscal recovery funding, something like that comes in again, or a bond, then it feels, but from the numbers I'm seeing on 4% projects, the amount of gap you need to provide, I'm a little cautious on. I want to do a stretch goal, but I'm a little cautious there because we've been able to support a few projects the last couple of years that I don't think on a typical year we'd be able to support.
But you've got the new state trust fund, which is big.
That's true. That's a good point.
And the state tax credit.
Good point.
I'm skeptical you're going to see $150 million every year, but if you could see half that,
okay.
You've got the state tax credit, which in urban areas is restricted to 4% deals. You may not need a huge amount of of local gap money.
Okay, good point.
So let's say you could do let's say just hypothetically 2 9s and 1 4.
Yeah.
A typical 9 is going to be anywhere between 75 and 100. Or 70 and 100. So there's 150 to 200 right there. If you could do a 200 unit bond deal, There's 400. So, I mean, 4 I think is certainly doable. 450 might be a bit of a bigger bite, but worth aiming for. But again, I don't have any more knowledge than anyone else does, so.
I like the 400 figure better. If we, can exceed that, that's great. But I also, hopefully there will be a bond deal that, I think we need to push for something like that. Not sure how, but, and not be completely dependent upon, state and other government funds. Financially, I think it's in the best interest of Tucson to consider going in that direction until it finally happens.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of 2 goals. I mean, to me, I still think that there should be an aim higher goal, right? Like, we know what we can do now, but there should also be a goal that's the actual ask. Look, Mayor and Council, if you were to provide X amount of dollars in the general funds every year for affordable housing, this is potentially how many more units we could be achieving, right? Like, isn't that, to me, that's how I would present it to Mayor and Council, right? Like, can we come up with that number? And they can say no, right? Like, but we can make, I think it's better to start high and then negotiate down than to come in with a number that's something that we already know is relatively within reach,
So Shay, just to remind you, we did that in February.
Okay,
So we asked them for $2 million a year to help supplement. That would maximize the scoring on the 9% tax credit projects.
and that was, I didn't realize there wasn't already a dollar amount that had been asked for,
Mhm.
and it was
Yeah,
shot down.
That was part of one of the 5 recommendations that we provided. I think we did that in February, memory serves. And they agreed to it. They said they agreed that they were going to do that. So I did make one mistake on something that I said. There's actually not 1392 in the pipeline. 200 units are actually in Marana. That's the Safford project that's being done by Dominion. So there's actually 1192 in the city of Tucson that I'm aware of that are in the development pipeline right now. So that would put the total number by the end of 20. Well, I guess by 2025 at 12,000 and change. So if we take the 12,018 and we add 400 a year for the next 4 years, that gets us to 13,618 by 2030. So is that, I think, what is that, Marianne and Shay and David and everybody else? Is that what you guys think we should be proposing?
The 400?
400 per year for the next 4 years should put us in with 400 net increase would put us at 13,618.
I'm more comfortable with that than the 450. What do you think, Megan?
I think that makes sense. I mean, I would still somehow show it as like what your overall is, and then this is what we believe is truly attainable, so that it's clear that that's what you're trying to achieve, is what's truly attainable.
Yeah. Hey, Jason, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I see where you guys are coming from. I think on the 4%, 4% deal per year, I mean, Dominion's doing something out of Marana. That's one deal. That's 200 units, but how much, it's all going to come down to how much gap money can be provided to make that deal feasible. I think it's a stretch to say we can do 200 units of 9% every year. I mean, that's, what do we win last year? Not this last round, but the year before, we won 63 units, right? So, I mean, I think it's pie in the sky to say we're going to do 400 units every single year, unless the city's willing to step up and fund some serious gap. I mean, I don't want to be the party pooper here, but 400 units is a big ask. The only thing that's stopping it from happening is money.
So put this into kind of context. So we've got, not including the tribal deals, there were 226 9% that were awarded this year. And there's a 261 unit 4% project that's in the city of Tucson this year. So we're going to be at 487 for 2023, most likely. Marianne?
Jason raises a good point. Maybe we do something, some kind of level up, but this is what we're going to need to do it. So, if the gap financing for these units, included some of the ARPA money, as well as the Housing Trust Fund and home, and it might not be there, maybe it's like, here's what is more reasonable for the funding that we have right now. But if we have, a bond pass, then we can add these many more units to it. You know what I'm trying to say is how do we inspire, encourage the council to get behind creating more units with their effort to bring in more funding, more funds that aren't necessarily governmental, and dependent upon the government. So maybe it's something like 200 to 400, but to get to the 400, this is what we need. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, this might be building off some of what you're saying, Marianne, if I understand that correctly. What I was going to comment on was I think there was some conversation about things outside of LIHTC and HUD funds, and then I could talk about what it would look like to have the more flexible funding of locally funded, and to just ensure that that is also part of a proposal, that it's not only how to leverage more funds for more LIHTC projects, but also I think like that aspirational base of like, this is a citizens committee that doesn't only have to be within the structures of what we ask for, of how a lot of affordable housing is already done, and getting to ask for things that require a little bit more creativity and a little bit more flexibility of funds. And I think for me, that's exactly why we'd be asking for more money from the city. Like I know in our budget itself, city council was saying, well, there's a lot in the budget. It's just not from the general budget, but those are very restricted funds. So being able to say, like, what would it take to really do what we want, and what kind of flexibility of that funding would be needed to build the units that are needed. And I don't have those answers, but I would love to have the conversation be open to those kinds of possibilities.
Okay.
Are you done? Was that it, Ray? Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, we're with the 400 unit mark, Jim, is that including this additional $2 million? Like, so when did that happen? I am still like lost as to when we asked for that additional money and when I mean, there's been no move on it, right, officially yet.
There were the 5 recommendations that primarily came out of this group last year. And that was one of them is to reestablish the housing trust fund for the city of Tucson.
Yeah, I remember that, but I don't remember there being any discussion of actual dollars or dollar amounts.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I don't remember any specific allocation from general fund money. It was just that one of the recommendations was to look into starting the housing trust fund again and potential funding options, but I don't think there was any allocation.
Yeah, I think I told them that 2 million number at the mayor and council meeting. And my thought process was to get maximum points with the 9% program, it needs $500,000 investment from the city, which represents maybe 3 to 4% of the total project cost. So I said, if the city is willing to put in $2 million, that would fully fund up to 4 applications per year based on the way the program is currently underwritten. And I gave them some economic development numbers on what that could generate here locally. So I think that was probably something I just said to them as an example of how we can get more 9% awards down here.
And you don't have a sense of what that number is for the 4%?
4% is very different. Their needs are very different. So it's not a competitive process, right? It has to pencil out financially, and so there's I know 4% projects that have a $10 million gap on one project. Marianne? You're on mute.
You're muted, Marianne.
Yeah, I know. And what was said about being able to, we need to also consider smaller projects, like Ray was saying, that are outside of the tax credit realm, because that could easily be, 1 or 200 if there were, some smaller projects. Maybe it's 100, a couple with 50 or less. So that's an option to consider too. And I think we should keep including that in our communication and our thinking process.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you, Ray.
The city is currently going after a Choice Neighborhoods grant.
Yeah, I know.
There's RAD financing. There's going to be a HUD 202 submittal round coming up here soon. So there are other options besides the LIHTC program for getting affordable housing. Well, I think we need to kind of wrap up this topic. So I guess, does somebody want to make a motion, or I guess I can make a motion? But just want to ask the question one more time. Do we think 13,600 is the right number in 2030, or do we want to go a little higher or a little lower? Joe.
I just want to say, as you are talking about a recommendation, I hope that we're also conveying, and that this body sees part of its job as conveying to mayor and council the actual need. And, Megan linked those numbers that you're talking about us having 10,000 and needing another 29,000 at 50% AMI or lower, that we're a quarter of the way to where we need to be. So it's not, so we can say, hey, our goal is this based on what we think is feasible for the next few years. But I hope we also convey the severity of that shortage as well. Thank you.
Good point, Marianne.
Thanks, Joe. And I really want us to also get across to mayor and council how much money we're gonna need to meet these. And that they have to come from other sources other than their reliance on the feds.
Some shrimp, there's in the freezer, Alfredo.
Not to pile on too much, but I think that yeah, just finding ways to support or foster, incubate, whatever you want to term you want to use, like different approaches, more creative approaches. We're looking at the units that are coming from LIHTC. We know that system works and what we can get from it. But I think along the way, that's not going to meet the need based off of the number of units or the funding that's even accessible or even possible through that approach. So if there's some way to build in, support for preservation or other kinds of support that we can, test out, right? Pilot, figure out what the appetite is within the development community for different approaches. I think that's an important part to keep in mind too.
Okay, well, I don't think we're ready to make a recommendation yet. That's the sense that I get just based on the discussion. Megan, that number, that 26,000 number that you threw out for the city, do you have a source for that?
Oh, that's looking at so if you look at the website for NLAHC, National Low Income Housing Coalition, and you look up Arizona, it actually breaks it down by Phoenix and Tucson as well. So the Tucson number is a deficit currently of 26,000. Oh, that's actually, though, I might even be looking at that wrong, because it's higher if we're looking at that's extremely low income, and then at or below 50% AMI is at 29,703.
Can you send me that link?
It's the same one that I sent earlier. I think you were looking at the total state number, which is
here we go.
Higher. And then if you look over, but that's, I mean, that's even just looking at or below 50%. And a lot of a lot of the programs for affordable sometimes go to 60%, sometimes even 80. But I do, I think we can all recognize that we have a significant deficit, especially for the extremely low income, and that even that number represents it, because if we have 26,000 that need, that are extremely low, which is typically 30% or below, and then 29,000 that needed at the 50% AMI and below.
All right, well, I'm going to take an action item away. I'm going to try to summarize something in writing, and then bring it back to the group, and we can talk about it next month. And I'll send it out before the meeting.
Yeah.
And then, maybe we could just summarize any changes and then agree upon a goal at that time. That sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that it? I think that was all we had on the agenda today, right? Let me see, let me pull it up again. We just had an update from PDSD. Corin?
Sure. So a couple things. So one, we are working on some code changes around affordable housing that I wanted to keep everyone up to date on. So one is kind of what was initiated by this committee, the whole commission, in February with mayor and council, which is code changes to incentivize affordable housing or provide more flexibility for affordable housing. And that now also included as a package with kind of additional analysis we're doing around redevelopment of underutilized sites in general, more broadly across the city. So, and incentives to facilitate redevelopment of those sites. So we're looking at some additional analysis now around what are the opportunity areas, what are the barriers, and then what are some of the tools we can think about for code changes. So we're developing a set of options we'll be bringing back to mayor and council in October to get more direction on kind of exactly where to go with that. But that will include some additional incentives for affordable housing. And then the second thing to update people on is that there's been a lot of discussion. There was discussion at the last commission meeting about manufactured housing and kind of tiny homes. And that is something that mayor and council have also asked for more information on. So we started a discussion yesterday at mayor and council around tiny homes and their the ability to use those for shelters and transitional housing, but also for permanent housing. So we're going to have a deeper discussion on this on August 8th, if anyone's interested. And we'll be going over some of the zoning, relevant zoning regulations and building code regulations, and getting direction from mayor and council on any further action they want us to take or consideration of code changes. And then this is something that came up at the commission, I think last month or the month before, probably both. So we're also planning to share that same information at the Commission on Equitable Housing, probably either next month or the month after, and go through some of those issues around manufactured housing, tiny homes, modular housing, you know, what are some of the zoning constraints, what are the building code issues, et cetera. So we'll be doing that soon. I see Mary Ann's hand up.
So Corin, based on the conversation we had between, you know, sheltering people.
Yeah.
Which is not tiny home.
Yeah.
And tiny homes, which have home settings, bathrooms, living rooms, plumbing, all that kind of stuff. Has that conversation come up to help educate the mayor and council? I'm meeting with Steve Kasachek on this very issue next week.
Right.
So, but I think what has given people they're misinformed in terms of what really is a tiny home, because that word gets used a lot. And so sheltering is one thing, and I think individual sheltering or something like that, we just need to have a term that makes more sense than calling it a tiny home with nothing in it and a tiny home with everything in it.
Yes, that is a great point, Marianne. Thanks for mentioning that. And that's actually how the conversation started at mayor and council yesterday. One of the council members even said tiny home means different things to different people. And so that's what we will be kind of trying to lay out on August 8th is like, what's the spectrum of what that can refer to? And we may try to funnel it a little bit in terms of how we use that terminology or what we're thinking of when we say tiny home. And as you're saying, Marianne, like really a home implies a kitchen and bathroom, like a full living space, an independent dwelling unit, but people are using tiny home for something that is also needed, which is a shelter, a temporary shelter, but a more independent shelter unit, or a micro shelter, sometimes people call it. And those have been set up in a lot of communities. Those have been set up in villages, tiny home villages with common kitchen and bathroom. But you're right, but then there's also tiny homes that are full dwelling units with a kitchen bathroom, and it's really hard to call both of those things tiny homes because they're so different. So I think that's led to a lot of, you know, confusion or just people meaning different things when they use that term. So that's what we're gonna try to lay out a little bit, is that full spectrum and get guidance on, you know, where we really want to go for Tucson and our community in terms of how we can make some of those types of tiny home villages easier to build. So that'll be August 8th. Please feel free to tune in. It's not going to be a public hearing. It's just an informational study session. But you know, that's great that you're speaking with a council member in advance, as you said. I mean, on topics that you're working on in Tucson, I think it's helpful for them to kind of hear from different groups and different folks that are housing providers about how they've interacted with these different housing models. So that's great. So that'll be August 8th. Anything else, Marianne? I see your hand still up.
Yeah, I just put it back up. I like the idea of mini shelter. Calling it a mini shelter explains it. You know, it explains it if we use that term instead of tiny home. You know, that plastic uh, example that Kozaczek has in front of his ward office, that's a mini shelter.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like you brought up mini shelter. I think that's a great term.
Yeah, maybe that's something that can connect with people.
Yeah, I think that works really
Okay.
well.
Okay, cool. We're still testing out these terms. Kenny, yeah.
Thanks. And I was wondering for that study session, will part of that be like kind of reporting back from different communities, what that experience has been like to find sites and create the infrastructure for that?
Yeah, we're going to share a little bit of a few case studies that we're aware of. So like one that's been, I think there's like a lot of awareness of in Tucson right now is the Seattle model, because that one of the organizations has been doing a lot of these tiny home quote village in Seattle has been really interested in Tucson in starting to build more of these micro shelters. And so they've spoken with a lot of council members. So that's one example. And those really are shelters. They're like small shelters, about 100 square feet, but on a site that has shared kitchen and bathroom. So that's one model, but then, like I said, we've heard interest in like the full spectrum of shelters, but also even like tiny home villages that really are homes. So like Flagstaff, for example, there's a few different examples there of like for Habitat for Humanity and Flagstaff, for example, is building 500 square foot homes, and they are homes on single lots as an affordable home ownership option. So we'll be sharing a few of those examples. And obviously like the needs and zoning issues are very different for those two different examples.
And the cost.
And the cost and yeah, operating model, everything, totally. Yeah, great point. So yeah, I think that's where, there is a very broad spectrum there. And some of those things are actually already allowed in Tucson now, through various tools that we have. There's ways we could make it easier, but some of the models we've heard about are definitely doable. So that's the second thing. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is our ADU model plan competition. So thanks for bringing that up, Megan. I'm glad that that word is getting out. We got awarded an AARP Community Challenge grant about a month ago, and we are using that funding to do an ADU model plan competition. So the whole idea is to create a catalog of model plans to make it easier to build an ADU, bring down the cost somewhat. And the cost is a big component, of course. Like this would bring down design costs, and we hope these designs would be fairly lower cost construction, but really it's kind of just making the process easier. That's, I think, the bigger piece of this in a lot of ways, because it gives people a starting place. There's, there'll be 5 or 10 options they can look at, see if one is a good fit for them, and just kind of simplifies and streamlines the process. And the idea is the selected plans could then, if they so choose, be pre-approved building plans. So that would really cut down the permitting time. So we will be launching this soon in the next week or so. Actually, more information will go out with the full kind of criteria and submission process. And we expect to open that up in the first week of August. And we'll be doing an info session for anyone interested. And then closing the submission window in the middle of September. And yeah, we're really excited and interested in getting some creative ideas for ADU. So those are our updates.
Lauren, will you send that an announcement out to us when you're going out for that polling? That'd be great.
The ADU design competition, we're going to send out the information. I think we're aiming for early next week, and I'll be sure to send it out to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Group, and then please feel free to forward far and wide.
All right, thank you, Corinne. I just had HCD updates next on the agenda, and that was it.
Yeah, unless Anne, I think she's taking a million phone calls. So I'll just sort of update. We are closing on Milagro on Oracle next week imminently. So that is what's taking up all of our time. We will let you all know about our groundbreaking that is scheduled for the future. And then we will also have a ribbon cutting once that's over. So you guys will all be invited to that too. And yeah, just sort of assisting Corin and talking through all of the things for tiny homes and just staying very, very busy. So more updates to come, and apologies that I'm not as coherent as I'd like to be today, but thanks.
All right, next steps, we have our next meeting will be August 3rd, and the full commission meeting is August 16th. Are there any items for future meetings? I actually wonder if the whole shelter, this whole tiny home shelter conversation is something that people might want to do a longer discussion on. We haven't really talked about it as the commission, but it's something I've been interested in as well, because I think there is a full, really broad spectrum from, you know, making it so that even like tents, right? And things like, how do you go about handling shelter at its most basic level, right? In a way that's humane and dignified and not just criminalizing people, and continuing to put those, you know, encampments in conflict with neighborhoods, right? Like I think there's a whole range, right, of issues I see when we're talking about basic shelter, you know, and I'm happy to see more, so, you know, more people talking about the other types of solutions out there, but yeah, I don't know if it's worth putting on the agenda for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think at our next meeting, that would be after we've gotten some input from Mayor Council, but I think it would be great to get more feedback from this group, because you guys have a lot of knowledge and expertise in this area. I mean, Marianne's going to be developing a tiny home village, and I think that it would be great to have more discussion if that's of interest to the committee at our next meeting or another meeting.
Okay, Joe.
Oh, yeah, when
Joe,
Sarah
did
was
you have
talking, yeah, when Sarah was talking, I was just wondering, I know she's given updates on projects, and there's kind of a focus on Milagro. I had mentioned kind of before the meeting that I had heard about a meeting about a project at 10th Avenue and 23rd Street. Wanted to know if she had off the top of her head any kind of a update on what that was going to be.
Yeah, so I'll chime in and I'll bug Ann if I get it wrong, or I'll let her bug me. But I think that, so South 10th, that site has been owned by the city of Tucson. It's the container maintenance site. Tucson Water is also on that site. There has been discussion and decision at the manager's level to shift the existing uses off-site to other facilities. So moving the container maintenance yard, the brush and bulky building was demoed. It had asbestos in it. So, you know, just starting to move the existing more industrial uses to other locations in the city. And then they have asked the Housing and Community Development Department to look at it for potential housing development. So we have just been doing very, very initial due diligence, environmental assessments on the site, just sort of understanding what the zoning is on the site, and kind of prepping, you know, just initial due diligence for affordable housing development. The meeting that we went to last week was on Monday with the Barrio Santa Rita Neighborhood Association, Barrio Santa Rita West Ochoa Neighborhood Association. We just asked to be an agenda item to introduce ourselves and start to introduce the project. We don't have any firm plans or designs or anything. It's really just in the very beginning stages of thinking what that site can be, how it can be utilized, how many units we could get, how the park space could be utilized, connections to greenways and bikeways. So that was an initial kickoff meeting, kind of just with the neighborhood association, one of many more to come. And yeah, just sort of, we're at the very beginning stages for the development of affordable housing. And Anne, if you have anything to add. Cool.
Did you get any good input from the neighborhood about kind of what they had in mind and what they were thinking?
Oh yeah, I wrote down like 4 pages of notes. We have
Okay.
lots of input, lots of struggles already in the neighborhood, right? Of
Yeah.
just, you know, issues happening now with crime and with home unsheltered and, you know, other things as well. So lots of listening at that session, and definitely got some good feedback. And like you had mentioned, Angie, she had written us a letter, you know, sort of back with some more of the input and comments and how to kind of move forward. So I think it was really productive. And there's a lot there. I think it's such a cool site. I drove around it right before the meeting started and really just becoming obsessed with it as what it holds for potential for, you know, community development in general. But at this point, you know, the goal is for affordable housing. So trying to sort out what that means, right? And not just putting a bunch of, you know, apartments on the site, but getting creative, adding in potential, you know, affordable home ownership opportunity and creative development design as well. So very early stages of it all, and lots of input received so far and lots more to come. So.
Okay, thanks. I hope as you know, that gets more fleshed out, that we hear more about it kind of in the CHD as well. Thanks.
Definitely. Thank you. Mary Ann, you got your hand up too?
Yeah, I was just wondering what the the initial reaction was to the potential of building affordable housing at that site.
I'm gonna say it was a lot of different ones, kind of the same. You know, very much like, why are you doing this? We don't know if we want those people, right? Or who are the people who are going to be there? You know, the people of the community. So it was heated in some moments, but I think ultimately it was just a really great session of listening that occurred. But yeah, I think some of the pushback is just because it's something different, it's change and mistrust from the past, right? Of the city doing things in the past that, you know, tore down existing communities for certain things, and the gentrification and displacement that's taken place. So sort of all those same themes that we hear when we do this. And that's part of this project's vision from the city, is to look at gentrification, displacement, think about it, you know, really approach this not just from a typical development standpoint, but more community development and, you know, multi-departmental. We have Parks and Recs department at the table, as well as transportation, right? Looking at it really cohesively. So yeah, pushback more from just like, you probably already have plans drawn up, but we don't. But, you know, we have ideas and we have to scribble things on paper to sort of figure out potential development costs and things like that. But nothing has been set in stone. And really, you know, I think it's the thing, something changing is being kind of the biggest fear of the community so far. But really excited to get in and work with the community on this site, because it is 12 acres and you know, really could just be a really interesting and great project, I think, too.
Yeah, I agree. Downtown Motor Apartments took a lot of flack about those people. Why are you doing this? That the 2 neighborhood associations, you know, a lot of it was the past about, you know, their feelings regarding Tucson and what Tucson had done. And same assumption, you're going to do this anyway, yada, yada. We don't want those people. It's only going to be crime and hell to pay basically for the neighborhood. And there's not going to be any parking. Anything that could come into play in that argument did. And so, you know, if you, we would be happy for the city to be able to give a tour of that property. Because we had the very same arguments, and they will see that the value of the houses increased in the area. No crime, you know, everything that they thought was going to happen never did. We're happy if that will further the cause for you guys to be able to use that.
Thank you, Marianne. I appreciate that. And I really, I'll take you up on a tour of it for myself and
Okay.
maybe some of the commission and committee members if you guys want to join me. But I do agree that having those examples to point to is really helpful. So thank you for that. And
Yeah, and it was historic, you know,
yeah.
there it was, yeah, so that might help. Okay,
Yes, we'll keep the commission updated. Like I said, and yeah, Joe, we are a little Milagro focused right now as we close, but we do have a lot of other projects that we, want to make sure that you're staying up to date on. And as we develop our website, right, you can go and check on that. And a lot of these projects will be listed on there too. So really trying to be transparent. I'm just trying to do like 8 jobs at once, and the website is not at the top today, but once this closing happens, I won't be like a title agent anymore. So that'll be fun. But until then, yeah, we'll give you sporadic updates. And I just told him about Milagro, but was there any other big updates that you can think of that may need to be spread to the committee?
Nothing that I can think of specific for this particular subcommittee.
Awesome, cool. And Shay, for future agenda items, so I've got, Jim, you're gonna come back, sort of with your thoughts put together. I'll help you with that if you need, compiling kind of what we put together over the last 2 meetings for that. So I'll have that on the next subcommittee agenda. And Shay, I'll pass on to Neto potentially to coordinate the discussion of the tiny homes. Would you prefer that to be just with the subcommittee, or do you want the full commission to talk about that as well?
I think it'd be nice to do a deep dive in the subcommittee first.
Yep, I can have that. I just want to clarify because. Cool.
Thank you. Awesome. I think that's it, right? So we're ready to adjourn. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.